Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. We are your hosts, Kristen and Karan. On this podcast, we are highlighting ordinary people living extraordinary lives. These are pirates who take small, bold actions daily to create social change. Pirate life is all about rebelling and breaking the rules for good. Creating lasting social change starts by first breaking our inner rules. After all, the hardest rules to break are your own. The pirates we highlight have dedicated themselves to creating good trouble.
Today, we're talking with Nate Baumgardner. Nate is an emotional healing and integration coach and uses plant medicine and psychedelics to facilitate that healing journey with his clients. Nate's mission is to support his clients in building a foundation of self-love through greater consciousness, and he envisions a world in which each person takes ownership of their mind and body and uses health as a catalyst to increase loving awareness for themselves and others. He's also the host of his own podcast, Innate Flow Podcast, so you can go check him out there as well. Welcome, Nate. We're excited to be chatting with you today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to be jamming with you both as well.
Yeah. Well, I've heard a little bit of your story and basically how you went from working with FEMA during the pandemic to becoming a full-time coach. And we would love for you to share with us that story of your pirate journey and how you got to here where you are today.
Yeah, I will. To start that journey, I'll take you back to March of 2020 when everybody's world changed, when the world shut down, and we in FEMA, working in the Department of Homeland Security, doing emergency management, emergency response, everything went virtual. And within the pandemic response in the US, FEMA received the bulk of the work doing that pandemic response. And so myself, as an analyst, as a program analyst working in the Denver area, had these two things happen simultaneously where, went from going into the office 5 days a week and engaging with people to working from my home virtually. And at the same time, my work doubled in having all of these different pulls for information. I was doing lessons learned and continuous improvement to look and examine how our processes are working and how they can be improved. And so with this confluence of, both being much more isolated and then having a whole heap of work on me, began to experience a lot of anxiety, both, in all of this different extra chaos in my life, in my work life, and then with the isolation of, the collective fear, the collective contraction that everyone was in this space, and then having very few people to actually, share and talk about this with one-to-one, in face-to-face, in person. And so found myself in this very unique position. This was before I knew about Mark England. I knew about the Enlifted system. I had done vocabulary at this point, had yet to have that catalyzing experience. And the catalyzing experience ended up being a friend of mine giving me some LSD. And I had sat with some plant medicine before in an intentional way. I lived in Amsterdam for 3 years, which we can get into at some point. And this leg of my journey, I took the 150 micrograms, put on the face mask, put on East Forest music for mushrooms, and had this experience of coming into contact with the Godhead, with the divine presence, and was shown all of the ways that I had caused people pain. People talk about that, near-death experience of being shown all of the pain that they caused people. That is what happened to me in being taken through the somatic experience of this pain. And then at the end of this initial start of the come up of this experience was then shown that this is my own self-judgment. This is something that I'm holding on to, this pain that I've caused people. And then was catapulted into this, over the period of 3 hours, this death and rebirth this having these multiple incarnations, this ego death that people talk about in the psychedelic experience. And in coming out of this into a more coherent, though still in the medicine space, saw that the work that I was doing was completely out of alignment with my soul's mission. And that led me onto the path of like, all right, if this is out of alignment, what does alignment mean? Who am I absent the identity of working for the Department of Homeland Security, doing this work that I have been deeply identified with for these 5 years that I've been doing it, and ultimately looking to see, you know, what is my heart want? What is my soul's calling? And that brought me to coaching. And that started with the Czech Academy, in, you know, engaging with Paul Chek's work, then Mark England, and doing the Enlifted system. And really in that, going deeper and deeper into the ownership of my actions, of my imagination, of my capacity to create my own reality. We have this word abracadabra: with my words I create. And much of my journey over these past 2 years has been ultimately that, learning where the things that I'm doing are out of alignment and how I can bring alignment to my ability to create my own life. So fast forward that to January of 2022, had been doing all of these things to prepare myself for this shift in identity, and left my job. That was right when they were pushing the vaccination. And that was just the little push that I needed. When they were requiring mandatory vaccination, I gave my boss a call and was like, I just said, hey, you know, I'm not going to get vaccinated for my job. And I feel called to do something differently with my life. And luckily he was very supportive and understanding and was like, hey, we get it. You know, what do you need from us? And I ended up ultimately using, over the 3 months from when I told him to when I left, I led workshops with my colleagues in FEMA and really exposed them to this work. And that helped me to gain confidence in my capacity to coach, and ultimately, you know, build the coaching practice that I have now, which when I look back on it is very, like, to think that in 3 months since quitting my job, I've become a psychedelic integration coach, a microdosing coach, which is completely different and is ultimately, you know, I mean, psychedelics, plant medicine, entheogens are still very much illegal against the law. And to come from the Homeland Security apparatus, being within the motherfucking matrix, as it were, to doing what I am now, it has been a beautiful transpiring of events to be here in my car in Taos, New Mexico.
Yeah, there's a lot of your story that really, I'm going to speak for both of us, resonates for both of us as two people who also left their full-time corporate jobs during the pandemic. And one of the things that really struck me is that it was challenging to find, like, get grounded on like shaky ground during the pandemic. Everything was changing. And it was during these changes that I think a lot of people realize when they get to take this pause that what they were doing wasn't serving them. But it sounds like you didn't have a pause. It was like a more of a fast forward button on the work that you were doing because you were so much busier. Was there like a pivotal moment? Like, I know my pivotal moments for when I made my decision to leave my job and go full-time coaching was I was working in corporate health and safety, and we were making our return to the office plans. And as I was helping draft these return to the office plans, I'm like, I don't want to fucking go. Like that's the last thing I want out of life right now is to return to that office and go back to work. So was there a pivotal moment in this, like, I don't know, fast forward hectic pace of what you were doing with FEMA with the extra workload that really pushed you over the edge?
It was the last couple of weeks of my training camp for the soul 90-day program when the Biden administration released that mandatory vaccination requirement. And I knew that I needed to leave my job. And I was still very much in that space of like, oh, it'll happen. I'll make the decision further along down the line. And I got that hit, that intuitive hit me right in the solar plexus of like, oh shit, if I'm really stepping to my edge, if I'm really, if I'm really integrating and taking action on the things that I know, because once you know, you can't unknow. And I imagine both of you had this experience of coming into that knowing. I was like, oh, okay, this is what I've got to do. And that next week, the trick of putting this in your calendar, I was like, all right, I put it in my personal calendar of like, call my supervisor and have the conversation with him. And it was a scary experience to step into that. Like, this is something I'm actually doing now. This is something that, taking the leap and surrendering to what will be. So that was that pivotal moment of recognizing that from like, oh, this is something that's going to be happening theoretically to, oh, this is happening. And it's happening sooner rather than later.
Training Camp for the Soul is also really good at getting people to be like, oh, my heart has not been in this job. That's what happened to me. Only I knew I needed to give myself some time because I was teaching. So it's like 1 more year, I'm going to put all these tools to work. And then I'm going to quit. And then COVID happened and my class, I was going to like my last day was going to be a week after graduation with my class. My class all stayed home and I moved up into a management role. And I was like, all right, now what? Everybody, like not half, but about a third of my coworkers got laid off. And I'm in a position where I can get promoted before they'd fire me. Like they'd promote me multiple times before they'd fire me. And yeah, it was, for me, that was like a big, scary step of getting to really put into practice that trusting the unknown that I learned through Training Camp for the Soul. Like, oh, you say you trust the unknown. Are you ready to really do it?
And it's having those integration steps. I had a very similar experience of, the pandemic created a lot of turnover. Being in the space of emergency management, there is a lot of, people leave their job very frequently, and there is a lot of opportunity for these battlefield promotions, as we call them. And our leadership in FEMA Region 8 had made it known to me. They're like, you know what, if you want it, there is a position for you in our leadership. And with that knowledge, this happened after I had my ego fracturing experience with LSD, them telling me this and coming back into my ego of like, oh shit, I could be, I could have this, be in this position of power where I, can, make the money, have the stability, and do something that is, even more, it's flattering to my ego to be in a position of power, to have this income, the stability, to look towards my retirement, knowing that the promotions will continue as long as I want them, because I'm good at my job. And ultimately that knowing of like, I'm good at my job and I can be good at anything. I can be good at especially the things that I'm most aligned with, coaching. I can become a world-class coach. And so that reinforcement of them saying like, look, you're good at this and we see a spot for you, helped me feel the capacity for me to create that spot for myself in the own business that I start.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, we talk about like, you said you're good at this job and you'll be good at it like going forward. And I had this very same reaction from my employers that, always praise that, oh, you're so good, and you get promotions. And the entire time feeling like such a fraud, like that they were going to find me out at any moment. I'm like, how can you say that I'm good at this job? Like, I don't even want to be here. But having that competency to like get the work done, even when your heart wasn't in it, was something that I dealt with for, 14 years in my last job. And even before that, I was a police officer, and like dealing with that, like someone's going to find out that I'm really shit at this, despite the fact that accolades. And what's really interesting to me is that feeling went away with coaching. I don't go to work anymore thinking that someone's going to find me out that I really suck at this. So it's really interesting how you say that, like, that that you would be good at the thing that you're actually aligned with, which is just true. That imposter syndrome that we talk about so much for coaches actually wasn't there when it was there with the other careers that I've had that were in alignment.
I still find sometimes the imposter syndrome showing up in small, softer ways, and recognize them as me continuing to grow and step to my edge of what I'm capable of. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, to what you're saying, like the imposter syndrome was all consuming previously, and in being in a space of recognition that I'm, at the very least for where I am in my journey, doing what it is that is my soul's calling. When I see the imposter syndrome show up, I recognize it as that fear stimuli that I am moving in the direction of that dharma.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between the imposter syndrome and knowing as a coach that you don't know everything and that there's room to grow. I feel that's a very different feeling and sensation, rather than like, I'm just faking it here.
Yeah.
And so
it's being in authenticity. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, so what started you on this nomadic journey that you're on now?
So living in Denver, the cost of living is very high. I had a condo that I was that I had bought and was living in, and was expensive. And so as I started my coaching, and brought in a couple of clients, acknowledged that I wasn't going to make enough to initially cover the rent. So I found a family who was looking for a place. It aligned perfectly, posted it on Facebook Marketplace, and within 24 hours got an awesome family who were interested in renting and needed to move out exactly when I was looking to start traveling. And so that brought me to begin building out my car, my Subaru Outback. Got a gearbox, got a bed in the back, and started my journey down to Austin for the Strong Coach Summit. Mike Bledsoe and the Strong Coach team created this really awesome, really beautiful container for coaches to learn, to teach, and he described it as summer camp for adults. And it was 4 days of incredible connection with people that ultimately anchored in what I envision for creating my own concrete community of people, of aligned people who are who have a similar vision and similar ways of perceiving the world. And in that, I mapped my trip down from Denver to Austin, and just started contacting yoga studios, CrossFit gyms, and got one hit from a float center in Midland, Texas, Source Flotation. And they put me up for a week, and I led my first in-person workshop with them. That was a really powerful experience to connect with people in coming out of this pandemic mindset to really be received by people in the physical realm who were open to connecting, open to being, and to hold space and to allow me to facilitate over this period of 3 hours an Enlifted workshop. And so that has been part of my journey. I'm back here in Taos, New Mexico, where I'm leading another workshop this weekend at High Frequency Loft, which is a yoga studio, ecstatic dance studio. They're bringing me in to do a very similar workshop using the Enlifted modality, combining that with some qigong, some breath work. And yeah, I am continuing this nomadic lifestyle, this nomadic journey for as long as I feel called to it. I'm going to be going out to the East Coast this fall, or the end of the summer, to hang out with Mark England and the rest of the Enlifted coaches. I imagine you may be there for at least a period over the month of October. And through this, I've been coaching. I'm building my coaching practice. I have launched a 12-week microdosing immersion program and am allowing it to look like whatever it needs to look like as I continue to set intention, as I continue to map out what it is that I want within my values, within the things that I feel called to do, within the things that light me up, and to really allow it to look like whatever it is going to within that.
I had a question in there and then it slipped my mind. So we'll go to our next question while I think about what it was. I had a legitimate one.
I choose to remember.
I choose to remember. And in the meantime, what's the social rebellion that you then are starting with your work? And I remember, have you already in that social rebellion, have you already done like a run through of your program, or is that still building?
I am leading the first beta, the class 1. We're 1 month in. So yes, I have launched it and will be kicking off class 2 in the end of June. So the social rebellion that I am leading is ultimately to make socially acceptable, to create a space for people to use plant medicine, psychedelics with intention, with responsibility, and acknowledgement of its power to ground into their own space, their own capacity to, create their own healing, to heal their trauma that then gives them capacity to bring awareness to their limiting beliefs and move into a space of creation. And plant medicine, particularly LSD, psilocybin, they both have this power to create neuroplasticity that, when combined with the story work, the awareness of our language, of our projections, they enable us to shift how we're taking in the world and bring awareness to our triggers in, the situations that cause us that space of contraction, that we can then heal the core wound within that. And the neuroplasticity that these plant medicines enable us to bring about expands this aperture of awareness and allows the creation of this new identity to happen at an exponential rate. And that is done with the power of intention, the power of being in the plant medicine space with awareness, and then with integration. And we use a lot of different tools within this program to create that space of safety within ourselves, that when challenging things come up, we can be in them, we can sit in them. And as Joseph Campbell says, any emotion fully felt is bliss, to allow that the expanded aperture that these medicines create to facilitate our moving through this dense energy, through our triggers, to a space of healing, to a space of awareness and bliss.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say from my personal experience, I'd done mushrooms before. I did training camp for the soul and learned the vocabulary and learned the enlifted story work method. And after, it's like there's a before and after, because I'd learned how to integrate my things that were coming up on my own. My husband Lance likes to remind me that there was one time, because we usually, if we do mushrooms, we'll go be separate, and then toward the end we come back together and we'll start talking about what we went through. And he reminds me that one of the times while we were talking, I told him that I did story work on myself the whole time. Like something would come up and I'd be like, cool, we don't need this anymore. How can we fix that and reword that? And yeah, there was I would say doing plant medicine along with all of these tools has been super helpful at speeding up the process, because I'm able to get past that ego of being like, no, the ego and inner critic both, like having those speak up and fight each other, and instead be like, okay, I can love on myself, I can see this, and we can choose a better option. So yeah, I like to hear what you're doing.
What you're describing is how these medicines can act as a mirror. And when we use them with the tools of story work, of inner child healing work, of ancestral healing work, it gives us it makes it a dojo. When we're in the plant medicine space, it becomes like, all right, how can I move with this mirror and allow it to increase my agility to move and be with them so that I can move through them and bring awareness to them. And I, about 2 months ago, sat with about 0.5 gram of psilocybin and had some deep shame stories coming up, a deep shadow wound in myself, and did the 4-step story work process on myself, taking myself through titling it, writing it out, reading it out full speed, slowing it down, adding in the breaths, and then changing the language, changing key pieces of the language. And it was powerful in how it has created anchors and how it has shifted my affirmation practice in helping to heal the wounds that were within that shadow, that shame story. So I love that is your practice as well. And I imagine that, many coaches within this space who also sit with plant medicines do so with so much more awareness, given that they have these tools. And I recommend them as a prerequisite, to go through Enlifted Level 1, go through the 90-day training camp for the soul program, as it makes being in the plant medicine space, where challenging things may come up, whether you like it or not. We have this conception of a bad trip. A bad trip is really, the deep things within yourself that you've been repressing. That is them bubbling up because you've been repressing them, because you've been pushing them down and not allowing them to come to the surface. Negation acknowledged. They come to the surface whether you like it or not. And when you have these tools, it increases your capacity to be with the challenging emotions.
So what are some of the more uncomfortable questions that you could ask yourself or you have asked yourselves during this practice and sitting with plant medicine?
So coming back to my LSD experience, what does my heart want? And ultimately, what my heart wanted was a 180-degree turn, going from working in the Department of Homeland Security to working with psychedelics. That is what my heart wanted. That is what my calling was. So what does my heart want? What will allow me to step more fully into my power? What have I been avoiding in my emotions, in my relationships, in my life? And those, start with those 3 questions, and you will get a long way in the wisdom that having this reflective space will bring to you. And there will be challenging things that come up when you ask yourself those questions, because you are tapping into something deeper within your subconscious. And I have the belief that, you go into a different spiritual realm when you are with the medicine, when you are with psilocybin, when you're with LSD, DMT, ayahuasca. These are powerful, as I said, mirrors that allow you, when you ask these questions, to for the truth to come up. MK Ultra, the CIA was using LSD as a truth serum back in the 1960s and had experiments around it. And it ultimately is, if you want to look at where you're out of your authenticity, you will see that. And in asking that question, the areas where you're out of alignment, much as they did with me, will come up.
The truth serum part too. Laugh because one time, I think it was the first time I took LSD in a group. You'd ask me a question and I couldn't. I usually have a hard time lying anyway, but like I could not. I would tell you straight up, like even if it put me in a bad light, I would still be like, nope, here you go. Here's the answer that's coming out of my mouth right now.
And the putting you in a bad light, that's ultimately a story.
Yeah.
And it's a story that when we think about the things that we want to say from a place of compassion and truth, that we can ultimately bring that into the space outside of us being under the influence of plant medicines. And that in being in, like, how can I speak the truth from a place of love and authenticity at the same time, we can step to that edge, that fear of like, oh, am I going to offend somebody in speaking the truth and being honest? And in showing up in that way, we can both, be in alignment with ourselves. We can be in integrity with ourselves and the things that we want, that then gives other people the permission and the model to do the same. And that is another powerful thing of when we sit with plant medicines, do so, setting in the intention, integrating the experience and allowing the meaning of our experience to evolve. We need the medicine less and less. I received the call the last time I sat with psilocybin to take a break. I'm taking a 4-month break from all plant medicine aside from cannabis. And in that, I'm ultimately seeing, what it is that I have integrated from, having sat with plant medicine in a very consistent way since that first experience back in the summer of 2020 when I had the ego fracturing. And what have I integrated from all of those lessons in my present mind, in my present identity, which has been a huge shift in identity. So allowing myself the space to be present with it has been my calling, as it's now a space that I coach and I guide people through in the microdosing program that I've launched.
You talk about a shift in identity, and we've talked a little bit on here before about that whole concept of role versus identity. Have you actually had a shift in actual identity, or is it more of the roles that you're playing now in your life has shifted?
Both. I, in coming from the identity that I was in, I very much identified with my work as an emergency manager, as an analyst for the Department of Homeland Security, and my ego identified very deeply with that and with the career track that I had, with the job security, with the little laminated badge that I had. And I would argue that, both my role, the practical function that I was filling in this incarnation that I had, and my identity have shifted deeply in, so it's like the function, the role that I'm serving versus what is the why behind that role. So that is my differentiation between what you're describing. And I'm curious what your reflections and what your past discussion has been.
Yeah, well, when I look at the different roles I've played in my life, right? Police officer, daughter, partner, I worked in environmental emergency services. All of these these things were different roles. None of them, any changes in those roles weren't not actually an impact on my identity. My identity is a lot more, I would say, fixed. Not that it can't change, but things like my values that I live by were less affected by the roles that I played. So when I would release a role or move on from a role, so say like police officer, my values and my true identity didn't change as a person, just the role that I was playing. And I found something that was a little bit more in tuned at the time. So I went from working in the police as a police officer to working into working with the environment and dealing with environmental emergencies. And that was a role that I played for almost 14 years. And I understand what you're saying. Like, I was very tied up with that. I considered myself an environmental superhero. We went out and we did, oil spills and train derailments and all of these things. And what I got to realize was that my true identity of who I was as a person was not connected to that role. And so when things would go wrong in a role, I took it less personally because it wasn't an impact on me as a person, if that makes sense. So now as a coach, part of the role as a coach is as a salesperson. Sales is a big part of being a coach because, well, we do this for money as part of our why. We have to make money out of it. And what I really learned was, which helped me actually be a better salesperson, was that a no from someone was not a reflection on me and who I was as a person, my identity. It was part of the role that I was playing as a salesperson. So I kind of differentiate that in more of when I talk about identity, I mean about my true self, my values, who I am as a person, what I believe in versus what I am doing. Even if I feel really connected to my role as a coach, it still is not my identity as a person. I hope that
100% makes sense to me. And I love the way that you described it, as our identity is very complex. Mm-hmm. And what you're describing for me is what I call like my soul consciousness, my soul identity. And that is ultimately like my connection with my highest truth. Mm-hmm. And as my stated values become more and more in alignment with my values manifested in reality, those values are becoming more and more aligned with my soul consciousness, with my soul identity. Ken Wilber, the founder of integral theory and spiral dynamics, refers to this as the story gap. And that is the gap between the story that we're telling ourselves and the story that we're telling other people. And the more we shrink that gap, the more we bring, the story we're telling ourselves into alignment with our soul consciousness, with that story we're telling other people. Ultimately, we are able to express ourselves most fully from the heart in our most embodied way, and be in integrity, be in a space of shining our gifts in their purest form.
So on with that, we like to talk about good trouble. So what does good trouble mean to you when you hear that? And how are you creating good trouble?
Good trouble is a beautiful concept that I've heard you guys talk about before. And the fact that these healing medicines are illegal, the fact that during the late 1960s, early 1970s, the Nixon administration saw the hippie movement as this big threat to ultimately what he saw as the status quo, the war in Vietnam, and saw LSD and psilocybin mushrooms, heroin as well for the Black Panther movement and other social movements that were coming up as a good way of criminalizing these social movements and ultimately giving them the capacity to throw people who were not breaking the law into prison and destabilize these social movements. And that ripple effect carries on today, where we still have 40,000 people in prison for selling cannabis, which is now legal broadly across the US. And I believe all but some cannabis in some way is legal in perhaps all but 3 states. And the fact that that is a truth, I believe, is evil. I don't believe people are evil, though I believe that actions can create evil in the world. And so in socializing the fact that these medicines can be used for our healing and are ultimately powerful in taking sovereignty over our own lives, taking responsibility for our own healing, I think that is the good trouble. Take out the I think. That is the good trouble that I am creating in my social sphere, that I aim to have a ripple effect to, whether they become legalized or not, to give people, to empower people with the capacity to use these to facilitate and create their own healing spaces, their own integrative spaces, so that they are taking action in their life to disconnect from the fear virus, to disconnect from the fear in the collective consciousness that I was discussing back during the beginning of the pandemic, that I was in the throes of as well, and to allow them to really step into a space of becoming the creators, to becoming the architects of their life, so that when they encounter the propaganda, when they encounter the fear virus that is looking to manipulate them and keep them in a space of contraction, because that is where they are most easily controlled. That is where I was most easily controlled. That is where I was most easily sold things to, and been in a space of unconscious consumerhood and being more easily manipulated in the space of receiving propaganda and information that was holding me from allowing my true gifts to express, from allowing me to shine my light. That is the trouble that I hope to instill in as many people as I am given the gift to in my life.
On that too, have you seen the short video on, I believe it's British troops that were given LSD and what happened? Yeah, they stopped wanting to do their training. They were climbing trees, they were wandering around, they put their guns down. Like I would like to, or I believe part of why these drugs became illegal was because they tested them on soldiers, and they found out that no one's going to want to go to war if they're taking these. So yeah, there's a big power in plant medicines, and I think that's part of it too.
What you're describing speaks to the fact that we have these neuroconvergent substances. We have nicotine, we have alcohol, we're talking about coffee and tea and caffeine, and those converge us into a space of focus, and a space of focus that is ultimately, or numbing in the case of alcohol, in alignment with the status quo. And that is going to keep us and narrow us into this path of conforming to the powers that be, to the power structure. Then we have neuroconvergent substances, and they open us up to the awareness that we are just a drop in the ocean of consciousness, that we are this, single point that is this single point in the broad spectrum of the light of awareness, the light that is the infinite, the divine, God, whatever word you wish to identify with. These medicines bring us into that awareness. And that is a very dangerous awareness to be in from the perspective of any system of power that is seeking to control and put people in a box so that they follow a trackable and predictable trajectory in their life.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your program?
Absolutely. So my program pulls from all of these different tools that have been a part of my learning since 2015. 2015 was when I listened to a podcast with Wim Hof and started with breath work. And that was the first step on my journey to opening up to my own power, my own recognition. And through 12 weeks, you will learn the power of creating ceremony with plant medicine and taking, as we talked about previously, ownership over your own healing. And with the guidance of having medicine circles once per week, having breathwork circles once per week, and using these tools to track how you are, sitting with this medicine, how it is affecting you cognitively, creatively, with setting the intention from the beginning. You're ultimately learning about how to create your life using plant medicine and use it as a tool for connection, a tool for creativity, a tool to move you into becoming the architect of your life. And, I can go even deeper into the nuances of, working with the different archetypes, the inner child. Kristen, you had mentioned the ego and the inner critic. Those are both archetypes that we explore in looking to see how this mirror is giving our capacity to bring awareness to the multiplicity of ourselves so that we're allowing them to become our friends. We're allowing ourselves to bring greater awareness to when we're operating in an inner critic story, when we're in an ego story, when our shadow is coming up, and to move more quickly through these contractive stories to be in an expansive story, to be in that state of bliss, of having moved through our trauma, of having moved through the limiting story that has resulted from that trauma, and find ourselves on the other side, and to be able to use plant medicine in an intentional way when we wish after those 12 weeks, and even go into a deeper, what Terrence McKenna calls the heroic dose. And that's something that we explore as well, of how to create your own container for a heroic dose that, Kristen, you described, with your partner, having you split separately and then come back, and you are supporting each other in that integration. As you tell your story, as you bring meaning to your story, you are allowing for that story to create meaning in your life. And as it creates that network of meaning, you're giving yourself the capacity to allow it to reinforce that soul identity, that soul consciousness, and become the highest version of yourself, become that creator self that then enables you to be that absent the plant medicine, and to bring in all these tools into your life, having used them in this expanded aperture, in this expansive state, to have that grounding, to use them when you're not in that space, to use them when you feel triggered in the grocery store or when you feel triggered in traffic, to come back to that awareness, having moved through this 12-week healing space.
The awareness, Lance and I've had a few times where he laughed too, where he'll, like, if something drops or falls, or he stubs his toe, he's had a tendency to be like, Kristen, what did you do? But he catches himself and he starts laughing. He's like, I was about to blame you for this thing that you weren't even close to me when it happened. Like, so for him, having that awareness, and then the stopping before he's like, what did you do? That's all your fault. And being like, no, it's not. It's not your fault at all. So it's fun as we get to dig in and start being aware of our patterns.
And the more that we do it, the more it reinforces that we can do it, that we have that awareness to do it, and to shrink that time, that awareness between that space between stimulus and response, as Viktor Frankl speaks about, that we're receiving this stimuli that triggers this wound, enforces a projection, and we see that projection for the story that it is, and bring ourselves back to, oh, what did you do? What did I do? And how can I take responsibility for what I am experiencing based on what you did?
Yeah. So then where can our listeners go to find out more about you, about your program, listen to your podcast, all the fun things?
Yeah, if you go to my Instagram at innate.flow, in my profile is the link tree to finding my podcast. It's available on Spotify and on Apple, on iTunes, the Innate Flow Podcast. You can go to my website, innateflow.co. If you are interested in learning about my microdosing immersion program, the second class of this program, I'll be kicking off the end of June, and there will be more concrete dates to follow. And I am receiving discovery calls where, if you have interest in exploring using microdosing, using plant medicine with intention as a healing tool, give me a call. I would love to discuss with you, even if you decide not to use the program as a container for your own healing, to help you create your own microdosing practice. As part of my mission is to really help people use this medicine in an intentional way. I will send you the tracker that I use to help people and guide them in setting an intention before they sit with the medicine, even if it's with a microdose, and to track these different metrics that will help them see how this medicine is showing up for them as a tool in supporting their awareness that we have described.
Cool. And our last question here is, sorry, how would you recommend our listeners go about starting their own journeys?
Get clear on the why. Why is it that you want to sit with psilocybin, with LSD, even with cannabis? For the longest time, I was using cannabis unconsciously. I was using it as a tool to numb out rather than as a tool for awareness, as this mirror to help me bring awareness to the stories that were holding me from showing up as my soul consciousness. So create a practice for listening to your intuition. The practice that I love is deep breath. Body, show me what a yes feels like. And what I'm getting is this resonance, this lifting energy from my sacral chakra up through my throat. It's like this ripple, this wave. So in saying that, speak it out, speak it out into reality. What is your yes? Then deep breath. Body, show me what a no feels like. And I have this dropping feeling into my sacral chakra of what that no is, and speak that out. And then body, is it in my highest alignment to sit with cannabis this morning? And I'm getting a no, because I've got another podcast right after this. And ultimately, I have been creating containers over the weekends when I disconnect, and that is my opportunity to set intention and sit with cannabis every Friday. And I may someday go into that, checking in with my intuition, and we'll get the no if I'm ready to stop. And ultimately learning to listen to our bodies, learning to listen to our soul, our intuition, in connection with what is right for me. And this can be used outside of the context of plant medicine for, body, do you feel like eating chicken or steak or a veggie burger for dinner tonight? Or really anything that you may have a question about. Is this relationship right for me to continue pursuing? Is this job in my highest and greatest? So learning to listen to our intuition, I think, is a first great step that allows us to then get clear on our why. Why are we doing this? Because that is our intention. Our intention is, what is this supporting me in creating more of within myself that then enables me to create more of in how I show up in my relationships and for the world.
Just as you were asking the question, like taking the deep breath and hearing you ask the question, my body was telling me, like, I had that dropping sense. I felt, with the no, it was like going from my throat on down, like, nope. And then the yes was like uplifting. It came from up my right side and then just hung out in my heart. And that was just listening. So I recommend too, for anybody listening to this, take some time and ask your body, listen in, tune in. And then I like as well with the food, what you were saying, I've been told as a manifesting generator, it's best to hear yes or no questions to make a decision instead of being like, what do you want for dinner? And have all the choices, be like, do you want steak? Do you want chicken? So that's a good addition to the yes or no too, to be able to be like, oh, this is what a yes is. This is what a no is. Now I can take a step forward.
Yeah, it really speaks to the power of words and the energy that words create in our body. Like, we subconsciously have a context for no in ourselves, and we have a context for yes in ourselves, and we can tap into that. Even if you're a constructive materialist or a scientific materialist and don't believe in all the woo-woo soul connection, like, your body knows what is best. We have an internal wisdom within our bodies that we can tap into, and we have a great power, like you're saying, when we frame these in yes or no questions. We eliminate the analysis by paralysis of, oh, there's so many choices, I'm just going to go to the Pringles or the Fritos and jam on junk food, rather than sitting with something that is really healthy and that will feed my body and allow me to continue showing up and nourish myself.
It's also just a nice, simple way to reconnect, because I find most of my clients that I work with are not, they're very disconnected with their body. So to have a simple way to like try and reestablish that connection is helpful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this conversation today. It was really great hearing everything. And we didn't even touch on the ancestral healing that we've all done together. Yeah. So, I mean, we could go on forever.
Certainly could. Yeah, we can do a second podcast on the ancestral healing component, as that is something I'll be taking my first microdosing group through as a component of the program. So I'm excited to see how that, combined with plant medicine as a catalyst, has the power to tap us into that ancestral connection, because that is a whole nother layer of the magic that we create with our words and with our awareness. So excited to eventually have the opportunity to connect with you all in the future.
Yeah, thanks.